The first thing that hit her wasn't the music. It was the smell of money. Polished marble, chilled champagne, and the faint sweetness of lilies that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Hannah Price stood at the edge of the Lux Hotel's grand ballroom, clutching a glass she couldn't afford, wearing a dress that wasn't hers, and praying no one noticed the trembling in her hands. Every surface gleamed under golden chandeliers, sequined gowns, tuxedos pressed to perfection, the faint clink of crystal glasses held by people who never had to check a price tag. Hannah's badge, stolen from her boss's desk that morning, hung around her neck, the only thing separating her from being thrown out by security. She told herself this was justice, not desperation. After all, the entire reason this gala existed tonight was her idea, the software project she built from scratch, only to watch her boss present it as his own. It was supposed to be her night. Instead, she stood invisible in the crowd, just another face pretending to belong. Her eyes drifted toward the stage. A giant screen flashed. Introducing VisionSync, the future of workplace AI. The audience applauded. Her boss, Charles Denton, stepped onto the platform with that smug smile he wore when he was taking credit for someone else's brilliance. Hannah's throat tightened. Months of sleepless nights, coding till her fingers ached, all stolen in a single PowerPoint presentation. She could almost hear him saying team effort while she sank further into debt, her name nowhere in sight. She turned away, blinking back tears, and that's when she saw him. Tyler. The man who once promised forever and walked out when her bank account went dry. He looked different now. Tailored suit, wristwatch that screamed success, arm wrapped around a woman who could have stepped straight out of a luxury campaign. Savannah, the fiancée. Every inch of her glowed, her gown shimmered under the lights, her hair sleek and golden, her smile sharp as glass. When Savannah laughed, it wasn't soft. It was the kind of laughter that filled a room, the kind that made people turn their heads. And they did. Tyler watched her like she hung the stars. Hannah's chest burned. She tried to disappear into the corner, but fate was cruel tonight. Savannah's gaze swept across the ballroom and stopped. Their eyes met, a flicker of confusion, then recognition, followed by that condescending smirk Hannah remembered all too well. Savannah leaned toward Tyler, whispered something, and moments later, both of them were walking straight toward her. Her palms went slick. Her pulse jumped. She reached for her drink, but her hand shook too much to lift it. Hannah? Tyler's voice cut through the music. Wow, didn't expect to see you here. Savannah tilted her head, her voice dripping sugar. Oh, you're with VisionSync too? I didn't realize they were hiring outside help. Laughter rippled from the group behind her. Hannah forced a smile she didn't feel. I'm here for the launch, she said softly. Savannah's gaze trailed over the frayed hem of her borrowed dress, her cracked phone peeking from her clutch. Adorable, she said. Well, enjoy the show, sweetheart. It's nice that you still try. They turned to leave, but something inside Hannah snapped. The humiliation, the loss, the theft, it all surged up at once. Not tonight. Not again. She lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the tremor in her gut. Actually, I'm not alone, she said. My boyfriend's just getting us drinks. Savannah paused. Tyler's brow arched. A boyfriend? Hannah's mind raced. Her heart pounded. There was no boyfriend, but she wasn't about to let them see her crumble. And then, from across the ballroom, a tall man in a black tuxedo caught her eye. He wasn't from her world. Everything about him radiated quiet confidence, wealth that didn't need to be flaunted. He lifted his glass, smiled, at her. In that instant, an idea, wild and reckless, sparked to life. Tonight, Hannah Price wasn't going to beg for recognition. She was going to rewrite the story. Because when you have nothing left to lose, even a lie can become your best weapon. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. Drop a comment below and tell us which country you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Now, let's see what happens when Hannah's little lie takes on a life of its own. 3 seconds. That's all it took for everything to start collapsing. Tyler's smirk widened as he leaned closer, his breath in that same faint cologne she once loved. Still chasing parties you're not invited to, huh, Hannah? His voice was low enough to sound casual, but every word was meant to sting. Savannah chuckled, resting a manicured hand on his arm like she was touching a trophy. Oh, don't be mean, Ty. She's probably here as part of the staff. Maybe a last-minute volunteer? Hannah's cheeks burned. Her heart slammed against her ribs, loud enough she could hear it over the band's slow jazz. Her brain scrambled. Say something, anything, before the humiliation became complete. But nothing came. Just a blur of shame, rage, and panic tightening in her chest. Fight. Flee. Fake confidence. Her mind kept looping those three words like a broken record. Running wasn't an option. They'd see. Arguing would make her look pathetic, and pretending confidence? She was one tremor away from breaking. Tyler tilted his head, eyes scanning her outfit, the borrowed satin that fit almost right but not quite. I'll admit, I'm surprised you showed up here. This isn't really your crowd. She forced a thin smile. Crowds change. Savannah sipped her drink, eyes glinting. But class doesn't. Hannah felt her stomach twist. The laughter from a nearby table grew louder. Or maybe it was her imagination. The whole ballroom suddenly felt smaller, hotter, like all those glittering eyes had turned her way. She needed to end this. To disappear before the night turned into another memory she'd hate herself for. But then, movement. Across the room near the bar stood a man she hadn't noticed before. Broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, posture straight, calm, like the chaos around him simply didn't exist. People seemed to shift around him instinctively, parting the air without him asking. Gabriel Lawson. Even from here, his presence carried weight. She'd seen his face in headlines. CEO of Lawson Dynamics, one of the country's most powerful tech firms. A billionaire who rarely appeared in public and never wasted words. The kind of man who didn't chase applause because the world already bowed for him. And somehow, he was looking right in her direction. Their eyes met for half a second, long enough for her breath to catch. He didn't smile, didn't move, but something about that stillness radiated quiet authority. And that's when the insane idea hit her. Her pulse surged. She straightened her shoulders. Tyler was still talking, something smug about her tenacity, but his voice blurred into background noise. Savannah's lips moved, but Hannah barely heard a word. All she could see was Gabriel. And before she could think twice, before logic could talk her down, she was walking, past Tyler, past Savannah's open-mouthed stare, straight across the ballroom. Each step felt like a countdown. 3 seconds to disaster. 3 seconds before the lie she was about to tell exploded in her face. The crowd parted slightly as she neared him. He turned, slowly, curiously, his piercing gray eyes studying her like he was trying to place her face. She didn't stop. She couldn't. She forced a nervous smile, lifted her chin and said the words that would change everything. "Babe, there you are," she blurted out, too loud, too fast. "I thought you'd missed the entrance." The room froze. The music didn't just fade. It stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Every eye swung toward her. Gabriel's brows lifted slightly. He didn't move, didn't speak, but the air between them felt heavy, charged. Behind her, she could feel Tyler's confusion, Savannah's whisper slicing through the silence. Did she just say, "Babe"? Hannah's smile faltered for half a heartbeat, her stomach plummeting. The weight of 100 eyes pressed down on her, waiting, measuring, ready to watch her crumble. But Gabriel didn't look away. He studied her, this trembling woman pretending to belong, and after what felt like an eternity, his mouth curved just slightly into the faintest, most dangerous smirk she'd ever seen. Then he reached for her hand. "Sorry, darling," he said smoothly, voice deep enough to carry. "Got caught in traffic." The crowd gasped. Savannah's drink clinked against her glass. Tyler's smirk vanished. And just like that, Hannah's lie became the truth, at least for tonight. For a split second, silence ruled the ballroom, the kind that stretches so tight it threatens to snap. Then, chaos began to breathe. Cameras lifted. Whispers rippled. Every neck in the room turned toward the woman clutching the billionaire's hand, like her life depended on it. The Lux Hotel staff exchanged glances. One security guard shifted uneasily near the entrance, waiting for a cue to escort her out, or worse. Hannah felt it, that flicker of suspicion closing in. Her hand started to tremble in Gabriel Lawson's grip, but before the guards could take a step, his voice cut through the murmurs, smooth, deep, and calm as still water. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart." The reaction was immediate. Conversations froze. Gasps scattered like sparks. Gabriel Lawson, The man known for keeping a 10-foot radius between himself and the rest of the world had just called her sweetheart. Tyler's jaw slackened. Savannah's champagne glass tilted dangerously in her hand, catching the chandelier's light like it might shatter. The air thickened with disbelief. Hannah blinked, her mind lagging behind reality. He was playing along? Gabriel turned his attention to her, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't soft, it wasn't kind. It was sharp, assessing, like he was peeling back every layer of her with a single look. He leaned in, his voice so low only she could hear. "You have 30 seconds to explain what's going on before I decide to walk away." Her heart nearly stopped. I panicked," she whispered, her breath catching. "That guy, he's my ex. He and his fiancée were humiliating me. I just needed to save face." Gabriel's expression didn't change. For 3 excruciating seconds, she thought he might hand her over to security right then. Then that enigmatic smirk deepened. "Interesting," he murmured. "I'll play along, for now." Before she could respond, he slipped an arm around her waist with the effortless confidence of a man used to owning every room he entered. The motion was fluid, practiced. His hand rested lightly, but the effect was magnetic. The entire crowd seemed to draw in closer, hungry for confirmation. "Shall we?" he asked quietly. She nodded, barely breathing. Together, they moved toward the center of the ballroom, and the whisper storm ignited into a hurricane. "Is that Hannah Price? The Lawson? Gabriel Lawson? Did anyone know he was dating someone?" Hannah's heart pounded against her ribs as she tried to keep her head high. For the first time that night, she wasn't invisible. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like walking a tightrope over fire. Tyler and Savannah stood rooted in place, disbelief painted across their faces. Savannah's smile had vanished completely. Tyler's eyes flicked between Gabriel and Hannah, the color draining from his cheeks. Gabriel noticed them, and with deliberate calm led Hannah right past their table. Tyler stammered, You two know each other?" Gabriel stopped. The pause was surgical. He looked down at Hannah, waiting. She forced a smile. "We've known each other for a while now." Gabriel's brow lifted slightly. A silent warning not to push her luck, before turning to Tyler with the kind of composure that could freeze fire. "A while indeed," he said, tone clipped but convincing. "She's quite the woman." Tyler swallowed hard. Savannah's lips pressed into a tight line. Hannah caught the way Savannah's perfect posture faltered, the first crack in her porcelain pride, and for the first time all evening, Hannah exhaled without shaking. The orchestra resumed softly in the background, strings weaving through the tension. Gabriel leaned close again, his breath brushing her ear. "You handle yourself better than I expected," he murmured. "Now, if you're going to keep this lie alive, you'd better act like you belong." Her pulse stumbled. "And if I don't?" His smirk flickered again, that quiet, dangerous kind of charm. "Then I'll let them eat you alive." Her throat went dry, and yet, somehow, standing beside him, she felt her spine straighten. Power, borrowed, maybe, but real all the same, ran through her. He gestured for 2 glasses of champagne, handed her one, and lifted his in a mock toast. "To appearances," he said. She met his gaze. "And to surviving them." Their glasses clinked. Across the room, Savannah's envy sharpened like a blade. Tyler looked defeated, small. And as Gabriel's faint smile lingered, the entire ballroom couldn't decide whether to envy her or fear her. Because in that moment, under the glittering chandeliers, Hannah Price wasn't a broke engineer anymore. She was the woman on the billionaire's arm, and everyone was watching. Before the gold chandeliers, before the champagne smiles and designer insults, there was the basement, cold, windowless, and always humming with the sound of old computers. That was Hannah Price's kingdom, if you could call it that. A forgotten floor beneath the gleaming towers of Lawson Tech's rival company, Technova Systems. She was the only black woman in her department, a junior engineer shoved into a corner of the building that smelled like burnt wires and damp carpet. Every day she clocked in early and left last, hoping someone, anyone, would notice her code, her persistence, her ideas. But the only person who noticed was Andrew Carter, her boss, the man who smiled at her during meetings but took her work home under his own name. When she first realized he'd stolen her software concept, VisionSync, she'd thought it had to be a mistake. She'd written the framework, the architecture, every algorithm by hand. She'd spent nights debugging until dawn, her fingers numb and her eyes aching. Then came the announcement email. Congratulations to Andrew Carter for his groundbreaking AI interface proposal. She'd stared at the screen for nearly a minute before the tears started. When she confronted him, Andrew had laughed. "You're young," he'd said. "Be patient. Success takes time, and sometimes the right face to present it." The right face. The words burned. She went to HR the next morning, trembling but determined. She brought her code files, her timestamps, her original notes. She expected fairness. Instead, she got silence, then whispers, then a gentle, patronizing smile. "Andrew has a proven track record," the HR manager said softly, her tone sugar-coated but dismissive. "You seem emotionally overwhelmed. Maybe take some time off. Emotionally unstable." That was the label they gave her, and with it came everything else. Isolation, smaller tasks, fewer meetings, no promotions. She became invisible, the temperamental engineer in the basement. But she couldn't quit. Not with her mother's medical bills piling up. Not when rent was 2 weeks overdue, and the only food in her fridge was whatever she could stretch from the vending machine downstairs. So she stayed, silent, swallowed. Her only friend was a rat that lived behind the radiator. She named him Professor. He'd peek out every night when the office was empty, and she'd share crumbs of her sandwich, whispering thoughts she couldn't tell anyone else. "They think I'm unstable, Professor," she'd murmur, tapping on her laptop. "Maybe I am, but at least I still know the truth." When her mother called, she pretended things were fine. When her landlord knocked, she pretended she wasn't home. When her coworkers laughed in the cafeteria upstairs, she pretended she didn't care. But the truth? She cared. Deeply. Each stolen idea, each dismissive glance chipped away at her until she barely recognized herself. Then one night, while scrolling through company emails she was no longer supposed to see, she found it, an invitation. Vision Sync Launch Gala presented by Technova Systems. Her code, her dream, her life's work. The event was hosted at the Lux Hotel, the kind of place she used to walk past on her way home, watching chauffeurs open doors for people who'd never know what it meant to beg for fairness. She stared at the digital invite for a long time. Her hands shook, not from fear this time, but something else. Defiance. For one night, she whispered to the glow of her screen, to the rat peeking out from the shadows, "I refuse to be invisible." And just like that, the girl from the basement decided to crash the ballroom of the powerful. Not for revenge, but for her name, her dignity, her stolen story. The plan had started as a joke. At least that's what Hannah told herself when she confessed it to Maya over instant noodles and cheap wine in their cramped apartment. "I'm serious," Hannah said, clutching the printed gala invite like it might burn her fingers. "They're launching my software tomorrow night. If I have to watch them steal it again, I'll lose my mind." Maya, her roommate and the closest thing she had to a sister, leaned back against the counter, one brow raised. "So what, you're just gonna stroll into the Lux Hotel, wave at the billionaires, and shout, 'That's my code'?" Hannah hesitated. "Something like that," Maya laughed, loud and bright, the kind of laugh that could scare away despair. "Girl, you can't even get past their front door without a badge." "Then I'll borrow one." That stopped the laughter. When Hannah didn't flinch, Maya sighed and rubbed her temples. "You're insane," she muttered, then softer. "But you're my kind of insane." The next 24 hours turned into a blur of whispered schemes and wild improvisation. Maya worked in catering, not for Technova, but close enough to know people who did. By noon, she'd texted Hannah a photo. "Meet your new identity, Clara Jenkins, event support." "Clara Jenkins?" Hannah replied. "Who's that?" No clue, but she called in sick. "Tonight, you're her replacement." By evening, they had it all. A borrowed dress from a friend of a friend, a fake name badge, laminated just enough to look real, and heels that were a size too small but good enough for survival. Hannah stood before the mirror, tugging at the frayed zipper of a dark blue gown that fit everywhere, except where it should. A strand of hair refused to cooperate, curling defiantly across her forehead. Maya appeared behind her, arms crossed, wearing an expression somewhere between a drill sergeant and a fairy godmother. "Listen," she said, grabbing Hannah's shoulders. "Walk in like you belong. Confidence is half the invitation. The other half is faking it better than the people who actually belong there." Hannah snorted. Easy for you to say. You don't trip every 3 steps. Then trip gracefully, Maya shot back. People pay good money to look that dramatic. The humor helped a little. Enough for Hannah to breathe. When they finally arrived at the Lux Hotel, the building looked less like a venue and more like a challenge. All glass, marble, and money. Limousines lined the entrance. Photographers flashed bulbs at guests stepping onto the red carpet. Hannah gripped her clutch tight. You sure this'll work? Maya gave her a mock salute. If it doesn't, I'll start a distraction involving a tray of champagne and an unfortunate accident. Now go. Hannah slipped around to the side entrance, where catering staff hurried in and out. For a moment she hesitated, then squared her shoulders, flashed the badge, and walked through. The first thing that hit her was the sound. Laughter, clinking glasses, music so smooth it didn't seem real. Her heart raced, but she forced her steps steady, her chin high. Confidence is half the invitation. She repeated Maya's words like a mantra. Her nerves betrayed her almost instantly. She caught her heel in the edge of a rug, stumbled forward, barely caught herself on a passing waiter's tray. Champagne wobbled, then miraculously stayed upright. Careful, miss, the waiter muttered. First day, she whispered, smiling through the panic. She drifted deeper into the crowd, her fake badge glinting under the chandeliers. The glamour around her was suffocating. Crystal chandeliers, gowns that shimmered like liquid light, conversations dipped in arrogance. Then across the room she saw him. Andrew Carter, her former boss, standing on stage beside a massive LED screen that displayed her code. The words Vision Sync glowed behind him like a crown he hadn't earned. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew announced, tonight we celebrate innovation, diversity, and the future of technology. Hannah almost laughed. Diversity? In a company that dismissed her voice because it didn't sound like theirs? The applause thundered, drowning her thoughts, and that's when she heard the familiar laugh, one she hadn't heard since her heart broke in two. Tyler. She turned. He was there, looking every bit the success story she wasn't allowed to be. Tuxedo, confidence, charm. And beside him, Savannah, radiant and smug, wearing a gown that looked like it had been made to mock hers. Hannah froze. Her throat tightened. Her vision blurred around the edges. Savannah noticed her first, eyes narrowing, recognition dawning into a smirk. Then Tyler turned. Their gazes locked. Her worst nightmare had just found her. And before she could slip away, Savannah's voice cut through the noise, sugar-coated and cruel. Well, if it isn't Hannah Price. That moment, that collision of past and present, humiliation and pride, would become the turning point of the night. The moment the girl from the basement stopped hiding and began pretending to belong. Because in a world that refused to see her worth, she decided to fake her way into being seen. The ballroom had shifted. Moments ago, Hannah had been a trespasser pretending to belong. Now, under Gabriel Lawson's quiet command, the air bent toward her, curious, cautious, and utterly captivated. Gabriel stood beside her like a wall of calm, his hand resting lightly at her back, not possessive but deliberate. The cameras and whispers swiveled their focus. Everyone, he said smoothly, his voice low yet slicing through the chatter like a violin string. Meet the woman who's been inspiring my latest project. A murmur rippled through the crowd, admiration mixed with envy and disbelief. Inspiring? Hannah's mind screamed. She wanted to laugh, cry, and vanish all at once. Savannah blinked rapidly, her perfect smile twitching. Tyler's jaw locked as he gripped his champagne flute until it cracked at the rim. And Hannah, she forced a laugh that wasn't quite hers. Oh, Gabriel loves to exaggerate, she said, praying her voice didn't betray her panic. But Gabriel only turned toward her, smirking faintly. Do I? He said, tilting his head just enough to make it look like a secret meant for two. Or do I just see what others overlook? That sentence, subtle, teasing, and yet protective, settled the room. For the first time in her life, people looked at her differently. Not as a nuisance, not as a shadow in the corner of a lab, but as someone worth noticing. Hannah could feel it, the power of his lie. Still, beneath her borrowed grace, her heart beat like a terrified drum. She didn't understand his angle, why he'd protect her, a stranger who'd barged into his world. As the night unfolded, he led her from one cluster of elites to another. This is Dr. Hannah Brooks, he introduced smoothly. Brilliant engineer. Visionary thinker. She wanted to correct him. Wanted to scream that she wasn't Dr. anything, that she was a mid-level nobody in a damp basement cubicle. But each time, the confidence in his tone silenced her shame. People nodded, smiled, asked questions she didn't dare answer fully. And each time she stumbled, Gabriel redirected with effortless charm. He was saving her. And she didn't know why. Later, as the crowd thinned and violins gave way to soft jazz, Gabriel leaned close. "You play the role well," he murmured, eyes glinting with something sharp, almost believable. "Almost," she whispered, trying not to tremble. He chuckled. "Low, rich, dangerous. You're not good at lying, Hannah, but you are brave. That's rarer." "I didn't mean to. Crash my event? Lie to my face? Pretend to know me?" he interrupted softly. "I know." Her throat tightened. "Then why didn't you expose me?" He studied her for a long beat, his expression unreadable. "Because I wanted to see what kind of woman walks into a lion's den wearing borrowed courage." Hannah blinked, unsure how to respond. "And what did you see?" He smiled faintly, not cold, not kind, just curious. Someone interesting. Then his gaze drifted past her shoulder, signaling to a bodyguard. The illusion of warmth dissolved. "Tomorrow night, dinner, 8 o'clock, he said quietly. "You'll come, and you'll tell me the truth. All of it." Her breath caught. "Dinner?" He met her eyes squarely. "You owe me a story, Hannah, and honesty." There was no malice in his tone, just that quiet, inescapable authority that made people listen. As he turned to leave, the weight of his presence lingered. The crowd parted for him naturally, like he owned the air itself. Hannah stood frozen among glittering chandeliers and murmuring guests, the taste of fear and fascination tangled on her tongue. She had walked into the gala, hoping to reclaim a fragment of dignity. Now she was walking out with a debt to a billionaire who saw straight through her lies. And for the first time that night, she didn't know if she'd just been saved or quietly marked. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a world so pristine it barely felt real. Glass walls stretched toward a skyline bathed in gold and violet, while soft jazz hummed from invisible speakers. Hannah's reflection flickered against the polished marble, borrowed dress, shaky hands, and a heart that refused to slow down. She'd spent the entire cab ride preparing for humiliation, rehearsing excuses, and reminding herself to leave if things turned cruel. But when she stepped into Lawson's, Gabriel's private penthouse restaurant, she realized nothing could have prepared her for him. He stood by the window, silhouetted against the city lights, a glass of wine untouched in his hand. There was no trace of last night's easy charm, only a quiet authority that filled the room. "Hannah," he said simply without turning, "you came." Her voice wavered. "You invited me." Finally he faced her, eyes sharp, assessing. "Most people would have run." "Most people don't owe you a lie," she replied, forcing a brittle smile. He gestured to the table. "Sit. I don't bite." Dinner was unnervingly intimate. No waiters, no noise. Just the hum of the city below and the clink of cutlery between questions that felt like cross-examination. He knew her full name, her job title, even the floor of the basement where she worked. "You're at TechVibe Solutions," he said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "Under Andrew Carter's division." Her fork froze midair. "You know Andrew?" "I know of him," Gabriel replied. "He pitched a proposal last month to our board, a predictive AI model for urban analytics. Familiar?" Hannah's stomach turned. It was her project. She nodded slowly. "That was my code." "I know." The knife slipped from her fingers and clattered against her plate. "You, what?" Gabriel leaned back, studying her face. "I invested in TechVibe 3 years ago. I read everything that comes across their R&D desk. Your algorithm was too refined for someone like Carter. He plagiarized you, sloppily." For a moment, the world blurred. She'd spent months watching him take credit, while HR dismissed her as emotional and unstable. To hear someone powerful acknowledge the truth, it almost hurt more than the lie. "Then why didn't you stop him?" she whispered. "I wanted to see what you'd do," Gabriel said. "You stayed silent." Her throat tightened. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice." "Not when your mother's hospital bills depend on keeping your job," she snapped, voice trembling. "Not when you're the only black woman in a department that already treats you like a mistake." Silence fell. Heavy, honest. Gabriel's expression shifted, the cold precision in his eyes dimming into something quieter. Compassion, maybe, or respect. He set down his glass. "You've got talent, Hannah, but you've let small men write your story." The words landed deep. deeper than she wanted them to. She looked away. It's easy to say that when you're not the one trying to survive. I wasn't born with this, he said, tone level. You think people handed me power because of my last name? She frowned. Didn't they? His faint smile didn't reach his eyes. No, I built it by refusing to let fear dictate who I'd be. You're scared, Hannah. Smart, but scared. Her eyes burned, but she didn't look away. You don't know me. I know enough, he said quietly. You lied to save face, you let a coward steal your brilliance, and still, you showed up here. That's more than most. The room seemed to breathe with her, slow, hesitant. Why tell me all this? She asked softly. Gabriel stood, walking to the window. The city shimmered behind him like a promise. Because, he said, turning toward her, you have two options now. Keep hiding in the basement, or help me take down Andrew Carter. Her pulse jumped. What are you saying? He met her gaze, unwavering. I'm offering you a second chance to own your story. Don't waste it. Hannah didn't answer, not yet. But for the first time in years, the thought of fighting back didn't feel impossible. It felt like destiny catching up. The ballroom looked almost identical to the night that had broken her. The same chandeliers, the same gold-trimmed stage, the same crowd of polished, privileged faces. But this time, Hannah wasn't sneaking in. This time, her name was printed on the program. Gabriel had arranged it quietly, a private demonstration for TechVibe's board and investors. No press releases. Just the people who'd built their empire on the backs of people like her. As she stood behind the curtain, her hands trembled. Every instinct screamed to run, to retreat back to safety, to the basement where no one could humiliate her again. But she remembered her mother's voice, weak from her hospital bed. Baby, don't let them erase you. So she stepped onto the stage. A soft murmur rippled through the audience. Andrew Carter sat in the front row, face pale and tight. He hadn't been told who the guest presenter would be. Gabriel watched from the side, expression unreadable. Just one nod from him, small, reassuring, and she began. Good afternoon, she said, her voice steady despite the shaking inside. My name is Hannah Price, and what I'm about to show you is my work. The screen lit up behind her, her algorithm's interface, lines of code she could recognize as easily as her own handwriting. She walked the investors through the logic, the efficiency, the way her model predicted urban movement with unprecedented accuracy. Her voice found rhythm, confidence. Halfway through, Andrew interrupted, his arrogance slipping. This is absurd. My team built that. No, Hannah said sharply. I built it. You just changed the file name. A gasp spread through the room. One of the senior investors, Mr. Delgado, frowned. Is that true, Andrew? Andrew stammered, sweat pooling at his collar. She's just trying to get attention. Gabriel's voice sliced cleanly through the chaos. Enough. All eyes turned toward him. He stepped forward, holding a printed document, TechVibe's internal submission logs. These show the first iteration of the project, time-stamped under Hannah Price's user ID, months before Andrew's version appeared. I verified them myself. Andrew's jaw slackened. You had no right. I had every right. Gabriel replied coolly. I own 12% of this company. Silence hit like thunder. Mr. Delgado turned to the board. Effective immediately, Andrew Carter is terminated pending investigation. The sound of Andrew's chair scraping back was the only noise as he stormed out, red-faced, defeated, swallowed by the same crowd that once applauded him. And then, slowly, the applause began again. Only this time, it wasn't for him. It was for her. The same investors who once ignored her in meetings now stood to clap. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered her name. Tyler and Savannah, dressed in their picture-perfect arrogance, lingered near the champagne bar, watching in disbelief. Savannah's voice, dripping envy, carried just loud enough for Hannah to hear. Guess money doesn't always buy genius. Hannah didn't turn toward her. She didn't need to. For the first time in her life, she didn't crave validation from anyone in that room. Her worth had never been dependent on their recognition. But reclaiming her voice, her name, felt like oxygen flooding her lungs after years underwater. Gabriel approached as the applause faded, eyes holding the faintest flicker of pride. I told you, he said quietly, you just needed to stand where you belonged. Hannah exhaled shakily, emotion catching in her throat. And what happens now? He smirked, folding his hands behind his back. Now? You decide what to build next, because tonight, You didn't just prove them wrong. You reminded them what brilliance looks like when it's no longer silenced. The chandeliers above glimmered brighter, as if echoing the rise of her heartbeat. The ballroom that had once humiliated her had become her victory stage, and she stood in the center of it all, radiant, unbroken, and finally free. The gala lights had dimmed, but the night refused to end. Hours later, Hannah found herself in Gabriel's private study, overlooking the city from a wall of glass that caught the reflection of her triumph. The skyline glowed, distant, silent, and alive with the promise of something new. She still hadn't come down from it all. The applause, the vindication, the look on Andrew's face when he was escorted out. Yet, behind the rush of victory, something else pressed quietly against her chest. Why her? Gabriel Lawson could have chosen anyone to help. Why her? He broke the silence first, his voice low and even. You did well tonight. Hannah let out a shaky laugh. I almost fainted halfway through the presentation. He smirked faintly. If you had, I would have caught you. Bad optics to let the star collapse on stage. She looked at him, searching his expression for humor, but there was none, just that same calm, unreadable strength. Why? She asked finally. Why go through all this trouble? You could have exposed Andrew yourself. Gabriel set his drink down, turning the glass between his fingers. Because it wouldn't have meant anything coming from me. He walked toward the window, hands in his pockets. I've taken down men like him before, arrogant, ruthless, entitled. But people like Andrew only crumble when the person they underestimated stands tall. Hannah frowned softly. You make it sound personal. It is, he said quietly. There was something in his tone, a tremor buried under the control. He hesitated, then exhaled as though releasing something heavy he'd carried for years. My sister, Elise, he said, eyes distant. She was an engineer too. Brilliant, 10 times smarter than I'll ever be. She joined a startup straight out of college, worked day and night on an AI program that could have revolutionized diagnostics in hospitals. He paused. Her supervisor took everything, claimed it as his own. She fought it and lost. Hannah's breath hitched. I'm so sorry. She didn't recover from it, he continued, voice low. She lost her career, her confidence. I tried to fight for her, but she said the world wasn't built for women like her to win. His jaw tightened. She passed 2 years later. Not by accident. The words hung in the air, heavy with the kind of grief that doesn't fade. It calcifies. I promised myself, Gabriel said, his voice soft but resolute, that if I ever found someone with the same fire, the same brilliance Elise had, I wouldn't stand by and watch them get crushed by people like Andrew Carter. Hannah felt something inside her shift, a mix of sorrow, gratitude, and recognition. The ache in his eyes mirrored the exhaustion in her own. So that's why you helped me, she murmured. He nodded. You reminded me of her. But you did something Elise never got the chance to. You stood your ground. Silence lingered between them, not uncomfortable, but full of understanding. Then she asked, almost in a whisper, was that what your clause was about? A faint smile curved his lips. Partly, it wasn't a punishment, it was a test. Of what? Truth, he said simply. I needed to know if you'd keep lying to protect yourself, or if you'd finally stand in your own light. If you'd lied at dinner, I'd have walked away. She blinked, stunned. You were testing me? Testing your honesty, he corrected. Not your worth. That was never in question. The room went still. Hannah's heartbeat echoed in her ears. I don't know whether to be angry or grateful, she admitted. Both are fair, he said softly, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. But maybe... Start with grateful. A quiet laugh escaped her lips despite herself. You're infuriating. I've been told that, he replied. Their eyes met, steady, unguarded. Not the electric spark of romance, but something deeper. Mutual recognition. 2 people carved from struggle, carrying different scars but the same resolve. I didn't do this for you to owe me, Gabriel said, his voice softening. I did it because the world needs people like you to stop apologizing for being brilliant. Hannah swallowed hard, emotion tightening her throat. Thank you for seeing me. He nodded, gaze steady. You made it impossible not to. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the glass like scattered code, fragments of broken systems, now rewritten. And for the first time, Hannah felt the weight of her story finally settle where it belonged. Not in silence, but in strength. The morning sun filtered through the glass walls of the new office. bright, alive, and humming with quiet ambition. Rows of young engineers tapped away on laptops, sketches covered the whiteboard, and the logo above the reception desk read, Code Haven Technologies, a Lawson venture. Hannah Price, once the invisible coder in a basement, now stood in a tailored suit before her team. The title still felt surreal when she saw it in print. A notification blinked on her laptop, another email from investors, this time addressed directly to her. No middleman, no stolen credit, just her name, exactly where it belonged. She leaned back in her chair, watching her reflection in the window. Not the woman who snuck into galas or whispered her worth under her breath, but someone who finally owned her space. 3 months. That's all it had taken for her world to turn upside down. Gabriel's firm had funded her startup after the Tech Vibe scandal exploded across industry headlines. Andrew Carter's name had become shorthand for corporate theft, while Hannah's story was the rallying cry for overlooked innovators everywhere. She'd done interview after interview, not as a victim, but as a founder who'd turned pain into purpose. And though the public loved the narrative of the underdog who rose, she knew the truth was quieter. Change wasn't a miracle. It was a choice she finally made. She was still learning to breathe in this new altitude of life. The office door opened softly. "Miss Price?" her assistant said. "Your 4 o'clock's here." She turned and nearly laughed. Tyler and Savannah stood in the doorway, polished and perfect, but just a little too rehearsed. Savannah's diamond ring caught the light. Tyler's nervous grin didn't. "Hannah," he said, voice falsely cheerful. "Wow, this place is impressive." Savannah's smile was tight, the kind people wear when they're hoping not to look small. "We didn't realize Code Haven was your company." Hannah rose, smoothing her blazer. "It tends to surprise people." An awkward pause filled the air. Tyler cleared his throat. "We were just in the area. Thought we'd stop by and congratulate you. Heard about the whole Tech Vibe situation. Pretty wild, huh?" "Wild," Hannah echoed, her tone even. "Some people really do get caught stealing what isn't theirs." Savannah shifted uneasily. "Well, you deserve it. You've always been determined." The condescension wasn't lost on her. Hannah simply smiled, steady and calm. "You were right once, Tyler," she said. "I did need someone on my level. It just took me a while to realize I was already there." Tyler's expression faltered, a faint flush creeping up his neck. Savannah's eyes darted toward the exit. Hannah extended a polite hand toward the door. "It was lovely seeing you both." They murmured a quick goodbye and left, their polished confidence trailing behind them like perfume. The door clicked shut. For a long moment, Hannah just stood there, letting the silence settle. She didn't feel triumphant, just free. Outside her office window, the skyline stretched wide, the same one she used to look at from underground, wondering if she'd ever belong above it. A soft knock broke her thoughts. Gabriel stepped in, sleeves rolled, the faintest hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Your meeting went well?" "Predictably," she said, smirking. "They wanted to reconnect." He chuckled, crossing the room to stand beside her. "Old habits," she said. "Old habits," she said. "Pretend confidence until it becomes real." He looked at her then, not as a savior or mentor, but as an equal. "You don't need to pretend anymore," Gabriel said, his voice low, certain. And when he wrapped his arm around her waist, it wasn't for show. It wasn't a deal or an act. It was real. Steady and unspoken, the way trust often is. Hannah exhaled, her gaze sweeping over the city that had once ignored her. "That night, I pretended to be someone I wasn't, and somehow it helped me find who I really was." If you were in Hannah's shoes, would you have done the same? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Souls and Riches.